Hi YouTube. I'm just thinking about belief again, partly as a follow-up to a video I made a couple of days ago about graphing belief in science and religion. And I'm still trying to think what belief is and how it works in different fields, and how it informs what people do in those areas, and what kind of affiliations they make to other people, all those kind of things really. So just a quick kind of definition of what I mean by belief. And I'm not saying it's a particularly good definition, but it's the one I'm kind of using right now. And I'm taking belief as, firstly I'm taking it as a psychological state. I'm not saying that belief that a person holds has any reflection on the outside world. Now you might disagree with that, but that's where I'm coming from, so that's the position I want to be established at the start. And I'm also saying it represents a kind of cognitive commitment to something. That's the kind of phrase I'm trying to play with at the moment, a kind of cognitive commitment. And what I'm trying to think through with that is that it's not that there's beliefs and then there's the things we don't believe, and there's a harsh separation. I'm trying to get a sense that all of us, and you can disagree with this, I'm going to get a sense that all of us have a continuum of beliefs. Some of which are firmly held to the point where you wouldn't even think of them as beliefs. You would think of them as just obvious facts of nature. Again, these maybe not be the best examples, but these are the kind of things I'm thinking of. So, for example, if somebody got a torch and shone a torch into your eye, the pupil of your eye would contract, wouldn't it? It would narrow, and that's a purely reflex action. And I want to try to say that that's a kind of cognitive commitment. It's entirely the operation of the brain, central nervous system, the muscles in the eye. That's all doing that. You don't need consciousness to even do it. But it's a commitment that's being made by an embodied cognitive process. Yeah. As an extreme example of what I think the spectrum of belief has at one end of it. And then a bit further along from that are those things which start to enter consciousness. So, for example, if I had a rock and I threw it at you, threw a rock at you, if you were close, you'd act as a reflex. It would be like shining a light into your eye. You'd just duck, you'd flinch. Yeah. If you were a little bit further back, you'd have time to think about it a bit, and then you decide whether it was going to hit you or not. So you might duck, or you might step to one side, or you might just stand still and watch it whiz past you or fall to the ground in front of you or something like that. So, and your choice of what to do would be a reflection of a belief, of your. Again, it's so physical. It's all you might disagree with the word belief here, but to me it seems there's something of a belief attached to that. And clearly you can be wrong. People can miscalculate so that their belief about where the rock would fall is incorrect. But you believe the rock is going to hit you, so you move. You believe the rock is going to miss you, so you stand still. And that's a kind of belief. A little bit further out from that, so a little bit more like the things we would actually call beliefs, is, let's say, I don't know, something that's much more probabilistic. That you've done. Oh God, I can't think of it. The sun is going to rise tomorrow. Really bad example, but let's say this: the sun is going to rise tomorrow. And it's risen every single time in the past, and you kind of know the physics and the cosmology of why the sun comes up in the morning. So you have a belief. It's a piece of inductive logic that's given it to you. Was that right? Inductive. Anyway, you believe the sun is going to rise tomorrow, but it's not quite of the same order of belief as knowing that the rock is going to fall to the ground in front of you or is going to smack you in the forehead. It's so firm. It's almost as firm a belief as the rock or the flashlight to the eye, but it's not quite, is it? It's a little bit more doubt in there. You might just say it's a millionth of 1% of doubt, but a little bit of doubt. And then you can keep stepping back from that. You know what I mean? Until you get to things which are just really easily probabilistic, or quite probabilistic. And you're not going to say their beliefs. So so until you get right to the things which you really have to put an act of faith in. I mean, believing the sun is going to come up tomorrow is a kind of act of faith, but I know it's not the same order of act of faith as as the kind of faith you see in spiritual and religious practices. But so that's the first point I want to make. Sorry if it was so laborious, but I want to say that belief isn't either there or not there. It's part of a sliding scale, a continuum, a spectrum, which goes from hard and fast belief, which is completely of the body and reflex and has no consciousness, to something that's, you know, quite a long way away from that, at least apparently so. Right, so that's point one. Second point is to do with vagueness. In my previous video I mentioned vagueness and how some people, I was characterising it as religious belief. Some people's belief seems to go stronger the more vague the belief is, whilst other people get more invested in their belief the more precise that belief is. So I was using there, you know, vaguely held religious beliefs to do with the presence of a kind of unidentifiable God, particularly a God that by definition can't be defined, as it is in some religious traditions, is the subject of a certain kind of belief. Whereas in the sciences you might say that, you know, belief, it really only becomes belief when it gets as solid as a rock to the forehead, as solid as a flashlight to the eye, you know, really piece of data. But I want to come back to this word vague, because vague is a bit of a derogatory term, or can be. But I think vague isn't. You know, vagueness in poetic terms has been associated with beauty and with a certain kind of identification of patterns, as opposed to identification of detail, a certain kind of a capacity to see the forest rather than get kind of caught up in looking at the individual trees. There's something about that, about vagueness, which I think is quite useful. And I want to just talk about vagueness in science. This is the last thing I'm going to say. I'm not sure if I can make the loop back to religion or not. But after making that last video, Macrina9, Mary, hi there Mary, sent me a video about the Higgs boson from Nottingham, 60 Symbols, which is a channel that comes out of Nottingham University. And it was about the Higgs boson, and these guys are in real trouble describing the Higgs boson. And had to use models and metaphors, and kind of vague models and metaphors too. Models and metaphors which they clearly knew were imprecise and vague, with the most common one being a Mexican hat. And two of these guys produced hats and said, well, the Higgs boson kind of exists, kind of like on a Mexican hat. This is the shape of what I guess is a kind of probability curve which describes its functioning, with the dip in the brim of the hat being where the point where that probability becomes expressible as a particle or something. But they're both talking about this hat in these kind of slightly vague, clearly analogical terms. But at what point does it become viable to say these guys believe in the existence of the Higgs boson Mexican hat? Believe in the Higgs boson of Mexican hat. I know that sounds mad, but if these mathematics are correct, and let's just assume for the sake of arguing that they are, this shape, this Mexican hat that describes the Higgs boson, is kind of more real than anything that we know about. It's more real than being hit in the head with a rock. You know, it's more real than a flashlight flashed into your eye. It's more real than anything that our senses can tell us. In terms of physics, it describes the world more accurately than our own senses could ever do. So it has more reality than that. So does it make sense to say, I believe in the Higgs boson Mexican hat? And what kind of a belief is that? You know, is it a belief at the vague end or the precise end? Is it a belief which is more akin to a sort of religious belief, albeit a true religion? Sorry if that doesn't sound too contentious. Or is it something else? What's the difference between that kind of a belief and the belief in a rock to the head? And what's the difference between that and the belief in a God? I hope that makes some kind of sense.